Happy New Year. For those of you who aren't used to the liturgical traditions following the church year, the cycle, this is our first day of the year. It's the first Sunday of the church year as we begin this season of Advent. A few short weeks of reflection, preparation, and expectation for the arrival of the one who redeems us and whose birth we'll celebrate on Christmas. A birth. A baby is coming, and not just any baby. It's the Christ child. The thought of a pending birth twists my emotions. On one hand, there is the joy of a new life coming into the world, a life that we can hold close to our hearts and love, and a new life that can show us unconditional love in return. Everyone loves to embrace a newborn. Yes, there is joy, but on the other hand, there's the uncertainty. A new life is coming into this world. What changes will this bring in our lives? What do we do now? I mean, it's too soon. Things aren't done yet. There's just so much to do before birth. Are we really ready for such a drastic change in our lives? Such commitment. Are we prepared? No matter how hard we try, we can never be fully prepared for the birth of a child, nor can we even begin to realize how all our relationships from that moment on will forever be changed. As we enter into Advent and start preparing ourselves for the birth of Jesus, our eyes begin to open to a clear understanding of how a simple birth in a manger changed our relationship with God forever. It is easy for us to let our minds just jump fast forward to the joys of the manger. But that's not one of the stories that we heard today. We have to wait for that one. So what might we take from the stories, the scriptures appointed for today, that might give us some direction as we struggle to balance our lives with the constant preparation for our encounters with Christ? As we look at Jeremiah, we get a short and concise message. God keeps promises. God keeps promises and works through the prophets and people like us to make those promises happen. When God works through us, we often find that it can be a little uncomfortable. Jeremiah had to tell his wealthy friends and others that things weren't right between them and God, and that God was going to do something about it, even if they were not. This passage lets us know that God's promise is to reestablish righteousness, to reestablish a right relationship between God and God's people. The passage also proclaims God's intention to establish justice and safety. Justice and safety. With this, we find a powerful sense of hope that has sustained faithful people through the hardest and messiest of times, and continues to do so for us here today. A wise bishop once said, "People fix problems, but God redeems messes." I like that. This holds true for us, no matter how messy things might seem. Moving on to the passage from 1 Thessalonians, St. Paul prays that God will strengthen their hearts in holiness, and that the Lord make them increase and abound in love for one another and for all people. Strengthen their hearts in holiness and increase their love for all people. Paul knows that God redeems messes. and does so through the boundless love that we share with one another. Through our baptisms, our Christian baptisms, we have claimed Christ's sustaining love forever. So no matter how messy things may get, we must hold tight to our faith and continue to share our reward with others through the gift of imitating Christ in the world. Now, at first glance of today's gospel, it is easy to ask the question, why is this the gospel lesson assigned for us on the first Sunday of Advent? Why, during a time when we're preparing for the birth of the infant Jesus, are we hearing the adult Jesus talk about gloom and doom? Well, it's not as bad as it sounds, and it's not really about gloom and doom. This gospel reading is really giving us a message of hope for when things in our lives change and get messy. Unlike the Gospel of Mark, which writes about the end of the world, the Gospel of Luke is telling us about the end of the world as we know it. This gospel writer is reflecting on the teachings of Jesus in light of his experience of Jerusalem and the temple having just been destroyed by the Romans. For the listeners of Luke's gospel, the world has not ended, but with the destruction of the temple, their lives and their understanding of God will never again be the same. When the temple was destroyed, it was beyond devastating to them. The very center of their culture was gone. When it came to living out their faith, this was the way they had always done it. This was all they knew. The birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus changed the world as they knew it, and they continue to change the way we live in the world too. In the Gospels, Jesus taught them, and is still teaching us today, how we are to live in relationship with God. Jesus teaches us to look beyond what has always been and experience God in new ways. Luke is telling us to be on guard, to be alert, and to be prepared. The gospel reminds us that in life, things happen to us that we don't want to happen. That at times we will experience fear, distress, and confusion. Luke reminds us that when our lives change and get messy, we are not to get weighed down with the dissipation, drunkenness, and the worries of this life. When these things begin to take place, we are to stand up and raise our heads. And just as we can see the new life that sprouts from the trees in the springtime, we too can focus our attention on Christ in our lives and in the sustaining love that we have been given. Advent is a time of intentionality to prepare ourselves to welcome Christ in our hearts. This intentionality is not simply to prepare us for the celebration of Christ's birth, but a preparation that happens constantly, allowing our fears and disbelief to slip away, and let faith open our eyes to experience Christ in all that we do, each and every day of this new church year. Amen.